Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoterica, our continuing series on some of my favorite unported arcade games of all time. And today we're taking a look at 1996 Osman, or Osman, I'm really not sure how it's pronounced. And it's released by the Mitchell Corporation, which was a group of ex-Capcom developers that originally worked on Strider. And you will see once the gameplay starts, if you've never seen this game before, it is basically just a spiritual sequel to Strider. And this was a game I actually almost pulled from the playlist because I absolutely love it. Visually, it's stunning, and the gameplay is great. But I will say that this is one of the hardest and cheapest arcade games I have ever played. And I'll talk more about it once we get to those areas, but some of the death mechanics in this are just downright unfair. But because it is such an incredible game to play and to look at and feels just like Strider, one of the favorite best arcade games of all time, I definitely included it on the list. But unlike the other games that I've shown before where I just can't hype them up enough, this is one where I'll definitely talk about some of its shortcomings. Because you'll see, I've already lost a life. You have 3 hit points, and there is stuff coming at you from all angles. 3 hits, and you are dead. And we haven't even gotten, I think, a third of the way through the first stage yet, and I've already lost one of my lives. So I will say that this game is going to eat your quarters up like crazy if you're actually using quarters to play it. Now, granted, in emulation, you're not using those quarters, or if you own the arcade PCB, you can set it to free play, but if you see this in the wild, you better have a deep pocket full of quarters, or you're never going to beat it. And I will say that I can rarely beat this game because even though I have unlimited continues, there's some areas in which you die, you get sent back, and if that area is giving you trouble, you're just going to have to deal with it. And now we're just kicking cars on an incline, and some of the stuff in this game just seems absurd. The story is very, vague and minimal, but it also is just weird. And you'll see we took another death there, and that's kind of our fault. You can definitely see the patterns here and be able to jump past those turrets that are shooting at you and climb up the walls and attack them. So some of the game is definitely your fault when you take damage, but sometimes it feels like the game is just forcing you to take damage so that the arcade operator can make a little bit more money off of it. And that's something that I don't love about some arcade games. They can be great, but they can also feel like they're designed just to take your money. And obviously if you're emulating it or you own the arcade PCB, that's not something you need to worry about, so we can be more forgiving of it. But it's still something that I like to talk about because some arcade games back in the day were just unfair and they were just trying to get as much money off you as possible, sometimes too much. But pretty much every boss does have a nice pattern to it. You'll see that as we jump up there, he's either going to lunge forward with that saw or he's going to use that flamethrower. So once you do learn the patterns of what they're expecting from you, it does become easier. The bosses generally aren't what give me trouble in this game. It's actually the stages at some points in time where it can feel quite unfair. And that's just something that it's part of playing arcade games. They were designed, you had to put money in to play them. It's not like you bought them and you took them home and could play them as much as you wanted. So they definitely had to produce revenue, but some of them feel like they wanted $40 off you to be able to beat the game, and Osman is definitely one of them. And you do have 3 super attacks, so some of the bosses you can basically just destroy by spamming that super, but if you run out of too many of them and you have none left, you can really get yourself stuck in a spot that you don't want to be in, because they're basically like the equivalent of a bomb attack in a shmup where they keep you from taking damage. You'll see there 1 super, and that mid-level boss was just completely dead, and now we go on to fighting a tiger, but screw the tiger, let's just run right by him. That is some of the mechanic of this game, is avoidance. When you see something that you just don't want to fight, you can run past it and completely not deal with it, and that is a valid strategy. And I would love to see a really top-level player play this, or something like a speed run. Sometimes when you watch those speedruns and you realize someone's mastered a game to such a high degree that you can never even fathom someone being that good at playing it. I'd love to get that good at the game, but honestly, I get frustrated and I stop playing. Because right there, we took damage because we had maybe half a second to complete our jump. But control-wise, it's all very fair and responsive. You're definitely not going to die because a button wasn't registered. You're going to die because you didn't push a button quick enough. And it's definitely a twitchy, fast-paced action game that feels like Strider, but I would say Strider's definitely more fair than Osman is. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop talking. You can see this little boss fight here, and I'll come back in just a minute to talk more about it, but the soundtrack's great, so I want you to appreciate that with all these crazy color visuals. So enjoy, and I'll be back in a moment. The funny thing about this game is you get these titles and it says Tuesday somewhere in the desert, and the game seems to take place over a week. It's a weird sort of inclusion to deal with, but it's just how the game works. It's a week's worth of Osman. And you'll see that now that we've broken through those chains there, we're instantaneously dealing with Sandora, a boss, and we'll spam a few of those supers to get past quickly. But it's really interesting because you get mid-bosses at beginning of stages. And generally that's why they're called mid-bosses. There's no real term for a beginning boss, but Osman is definitely going to give you a boss fight right when the stage starts. And I do like those little butterflies with the colorfulness. It's very psychedelic of a game, but it looks great, it sounds great, it plays great. It's got everything that I want in an arcade game, but that difficulty just completely destroys me every single time. And if it had been a little bit easier to play this game, I think it would be higher on my list. It's definitely still a great game and one that I recommend you check out, and maybe you'll just be better at it than I was. But for me, if they had just toned the difficulty down a little bit, this would have been an absolute top 10 versus maybe like a top 30 for me. Because, you know, they put power-ups in places that you're intentionally going to be taking damage in. So there's a trade-off between trying to power yourself up and trying to avoid taking damage. And that to me, like I said, just doesn't feel fair all the time. And arcade games are just known for it, but that's something I keep talking about on this series about fairness in arcade games, and Osman is definitely on the wrong side of the spectrum as far as that's concerned. But now we're going into another boss fight. The stages go by very quickly, and I do love all these sprites here. Cannons, he's got his sunglasses on, he's got this gigantic Dracula looking cape. So as far as the art direction is concerned, this game is like a futuristic, just insane level of detail. And now we're spinning around in this wind. We need to break ourselves free. And you'll see here that I don't really have much trouble with the boss. And that's the funny thing about this game is usually in arcade games, the boss battles are what are really going to be punishing and beat you up hard. And the stages are going to be challenging, but you'll get through them. Osman is the exact opposite of that scenario. The boss battles aren't that hard. I didn't actually lose a life on that one. Where the stages, I can burn through so many virtual credits, it's not even funny. But it's fun. And now it's Wednesday. You'll see, a day has gone by. And the day in the life of Osman this time is going to bring us to the ocean. And you'll see you get these little bits of story. They're not important. It's an arcade game. They always have some sort of story, but honestly, it never really matters that much. But I love this kind of cartoony pirate ship you're on here with the Skull and Bones flags on them. The game definitely, it kind of almost feels like it's poking fun at itself or poking fun at Capcom and Strider, because Mitchell Corp was, founded by ex-Capcom devs that I don't think had the best relationship after they left Capcom. But you'll see here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to end up dying, and we're going to get pushed back slightly. But later on in the game, there's a stage where it just doesn't matter how close I get to finishing it. If I die, I'm going back 45 seconds. And because that game feels incredibly unfair right then and there, that I tried to get past it 15 times and I stopped the capture. Because normally I'll put up long plays of these videos, and in this instance I did not, because that day I couldn't beat it. And I have beaten the game before. It's just one of those things. I wasn't on that day. But that is Osman. It's basically a Strider clone in the best way possible, and outside of some absolutely punishing difficulty, it's definitely a game that I recommend you play. And I do want to play this more and get better at it, because it's something that I really feel like once you get good, it's going to feel that much more incredible. It's kind of like Super Ghouls and Ghosts. That game can be punishing in its difficulty, but when you really learn it and can beat it on 1 or 2 continues, suddenly that game opens up and feels that much more impressive than it did before. And I think Osman's going to be one of those things where I just have to dedicate the time to getting better at it. But short of that, we really appreciate you guys watching it. If you could do us a huge favor, go down below and hit like and subscribe. Definitely helps us out, because it takes a lot of time to make each and every one of these videos. We'll be back on Sunday with another, and on Tuesday and Friday with episodes as well. Short of that, bye-bye.